All right. It's time for me to lay a trip on you. One can't really talk about things that are as awesome as the whole of creation and the processes going through it without feeling somewhat sheepish. Therefore, one has to buffer oneself up however one can. And one way you can do that is by giving yourself an air of wisdom. And one way you can give yourself an air of wisdom is to act as though you were the elder. And I probably am the elder in here, in this group. But this is all coming out of me saying I'm going to lay a nostalgia, wisdom, elder trip on you. I was once a little boy. And when I was a little boy, my father and mother were both very active people. The whole family has a family signature of being ruled by Mars. We're very sarcastic with each other, we're competitive with each other, and we're active. And I grew up on a little tiny farm. In fact, with the modern economy, you couldn't even live on such a farm now. It was only 42 acres large. And my father was a half-time farmer and a half-time plumber. The farm was an old-fashioned farm in those days. There were horses and cows and pigs and chickens and cats and dogs and mixed in with all the wild animals, the mice and things like that. But around the neighborhood we were known as the gypsies because there wasn't a weekend in summer, spring, or fall that we weren't gone somewhere. And the favorite place was to grandmother and grandfather's place. My father was an orphan, so he had no immediate kin, and they lived in Milwaukee anyway, which that was the city, and if you're a farm kid, you just hate the city. But my mother grew up in a very primitive setting in Marinette County, and they were primitive farmers, and I think there were 10 or 11 children, and at least half of the boys, when they grew up, were lumberjacks during part of their young manhood. It was their passage into manhood. But we would always go up to visit Grandma and Grandpa. And it was a several-hour drive. And children don't like sitting very well in an automobile. And so in order to keep ourselves busy, we had a game that we called horses. And after a few trips in a few years, we had fights about who was going to sit on which side of the car. Because the game of horses went, every time you saw a horse on your side of the car and called it out, before the horse got behind the car, at a right angle to the car, you got a point for that. Except for a white horse, you got 10 points for that. If you missed a horse and it got behind the car, the person sitting on the other side could claim it for their own. And so it was a keen thing of observation, so that you were having to watch both sides of the road. And my father loved to be an instigator, so he would take different routes to even the game up and to mischief. And then the big law was that if you went past a graveyard and the person on the other side of the car said, you got a graveyard on your side, before it got beyond the car, then you lost all your horses and you had to start all over again. And the whole thing about this was that eventually one of the laws of the game became that you had to sit on the same side of the car coming back as when you went out, so that you'd get a shot at the same horses that, but the horses might be in a different pasture and you might not get it. And if we were especially noisy, my father would threaten to take a special route past cemeteries just before we got home. And it was a very good experience because when you had to, it sharpened your observation, and the time really passed so that you didn't learn all of those jingles. You know, there were jingles on the highway in those days. Like every 500 feet there would be a sign that would say, first one would say, if it's harmony. The next one would say, you crave. The next one would say, get a tuba, Burma shave. And so we read the Burma shave signs and things like that going down the highway. But not only did it give you a sharp observation and a bit of competitiveness, and it made the time fly by quickly, but it made you aware of something. It made you aware of seeing the thing that you have seen before from just the opposite perspective. Because if you were on the east side of the car going up, then you would be on the west side of the car coming back. And when you gloated over that pair of white horses in one field, you dreaded it coming back, and you hoped that they were in the barn coming the other way. That is a very important principle. It's time to recapitulate again. And the way the recapitulation goes in the cosmos is in exactly reverse order from the way things happened on the way out. It's a law that is hinted at in two places. It's hinted at in the Revelation of St. John, and it's hinted at in the opening passages of St. John's Gospel. In the Revelation, it says, the first shall be last. And in the Gospel of St. John, it is he that comes before me shall come after me, because he was before. He that cometh after me is preferred before me because he was before me. It's the same kind of mirror image that comes from seeing things in a cyclical revolution, going forward and back through the same kind of state. So what this is after a while, you know, when you can only recapitulate so many times without it being boring. And if you do a recap every time, you have to be extremely inventive about doing these talks, or everybody will say, it's the same stuff again. He starts out saying the same thing every time, and you just have to go for greater creativity. In fact, the actual living spiritual life requires extreme creativity. In fact, I think if one lives a truly Christian life, a truly wide-awake spiritual life, you can never do something exactly the same twice. The still small voice that speaks within never does exactly the same thing twice. Because if it did, you'd never know that it wasn't a very, very clever counterfeit from the opposition. It has a great way of, I don't know how we'd say it, the less perfected part of ourselves working from the subconscious has a great way of imitating the voice of the higher spiritual self. All right, we're getting way afield here. I'll get so creative I won't do anything from the notes, and we'll get nothing done tonight. All right. Before, when we looked at rests and recapitulations, we said that rests were done, we recapped so that nothing was lost. Or we recapped to get back to a unity and to regroup. And when we came back to the initial source of unity and came out, we could come back restored. And now from looking at the horses, we see that there is something else. That in the process of unspinning things, by going backwards over what we've just gone through, we release and we extract the essence of experience that we've had in evolution, and it becomes part of us. So that to review, and to review backwards and to recapitulate, which is what happens in evolution, is not merely so that nothing is lost. It's actually like a spiritual nutrition, so that everything that happens in evolution is ours, and it's ours as quickly as possible. And it also, if we see something from cause to effect and from effect back to cause, it strengthens the entirety of the moment of experience. And another reason for this is to get a sense of time. Because if we go linearly, we tend to go tangentially. And if we just go for new experience, we get very strung out in our consciousness, and we lose a sense of rhythm and of time. You can only do something so long without getting bogged down. So when we absorb the past and withdraw and go into a great cosmic rest and recall things in the process of going into that rest, that is one of the purposes for it. All right, we do have new people here tonight, so we should recap a little bit. What we're talking about is from the very grand way until eventually we'll get right down to everyday living. That'll probably take us till June. We might even go all summer. I'm not sure about that. We're following the creation of the cosmos. We're looking at it as an evolutionary creation, in that the idea grows and becomes more ramified as it develops. And there is actually a spontaneous creation within the initial creative idea. It is not evolution in the sense of Darwin. We will talk about that somewhere along the line. And it's not creation in the sense of creationism, that this all happened in 10 days' time and 7 days' time, and that it was just appeared magically like that. We're talking about a very, very slow development, something that we haven't even yet, and I don't know if we will attempt to put it into terms of time that we can understand. So now let's review what we've actually done. We'll be much swifter about it. First of all, we gave up our all-being. And we went into a period of time of the character of Saturn. And when we gave up our all-consciousness, we didn't even have a self-consciousness. We had no conception of individual identity, and we had the bliss of the divine. And in this we had the potential of selfhood. And we agreed to participate in this, and we were immersed within matter and passed through 7 globes of space. And we went through 7 revolutions of consciousness. Yes, we went through all 7 globes. We passed from within first to one globe, and then dissolved that, and then externalized it, and then externalized further, and then externalized further. The globes are actually within one another, and we revolved our consciousness out and back in, out and back in, out and back in. So that's a very simplified conception of dimensionality. We did that 7 times. Each time, the first 3 times, 3.5 times progressively deeper in matter, and then the next 3.5 times gradually withdrawing, and then went into a great rest. So periods of time indicate qualities of spirit,
Globes of space indicate states of matter. And revolutions of consciousness indicate the nature of experience that awakens different grades or qualities of consciousness within the spirit-matter continuum. Before we looked at all of this, we had the very far-fetched understanding of consciousness, unconsciousness, all consciousness being the one thing that permeates all being. All right. In this period, things got no denser than thought, and we were thought mineral-like beings. We were formed. Some of us resisted and echoed the thoughts back. And after having had so many experiences in the first 6 revolutions of being formed by the gods and taking basic shape ideas to our consciousness, in the 7th revolution, awakened in us was the potential of will. That is to say, the divine spirit, the deepest quality that we now have in our cosmic being, the quality of will, is pitted against resistance of mineral form. Then we talked a lot about rest, and then we talked about a sun period following the Saturn period. And in that sun period, we, from having remembered all the experiences of different forms and how they were metamorphized out of each other, during the rest, that sank into our being, and it gave us the idea of a form that grows. And this was part of the cosmic consciousness that is built into all of us. We still have a form, only it's now very elaborate, and we have a vitality, so that in this period, the sun period, everything became light, even though we were all part of the solar system, and the solar system was no more dense than our desires, our emotions, our feelings. This goes way beyond the concepts of modern science with magnetic fields and things like that, because the magnetic fields are conditions that are described by spiritual science as part of the etheric realms. So we haven't even gotten that dense yet. And so we were plants in that we could grow and that we could take life to us. The service that we offered to the cosmos is just like the service that the minerals offer now. And that is to provide the stuff for form. The service that we offered in the sun period was the service of vitality. That we literally gave vitality, life, in the same way that human beings and animals need to eat plants to stay alive. They have to have something vital, raw, and fresh. We had that function then. All right. That's about where we left off last time. And then we rested again. It's not clear how long we rested, but probably longer, because the rest was less deep. The withdrawals are not complete withdrawals all the way back to the conditions as they were ab initio, but we withdraw far enough to have withdrawn all of the experience that we have and draw it into the spirit. But it's just like, again, this is the law that we keep going back to again and again. Unity is maintained in the cosmos through analogy. In the same way that there are 7 periods of time in the cosmos, there are 7 different states or analogous globes of matter, in 7 different realms of existence, in 7 different revolutions of consciousness. And we've talked about a process of going through 7 different stages in 7 different phases, which we talked a little bit about those complications last time. There's a principle of analogy. And the analogy is exactly the same thing as what happens when we go to sleep at night. If we don't sleep deeply, we need to sleep longer. And when we're immersed a little bit in matter yet, or a little bit, even though the matter is to us now grand spiritual worlds, we don't become quite as unconscious. So between the sun period and the period that we're going to speak about this evening, the moon period, the rest here was longer than the rest here because the rest here went more deeply into the spiritual worlds than the rest between the sun and moon period. Also, the reason why the rest is longer here is because we had more complicated things that we had done in our creative activity. And when you've got more complications, when you have to deal with the interactions between a physical and a vital body, you don't have to worry about a stone rotting on you. You don't have to worry about, you got to feed, if you have a pet stone, you don't have to water it every day. You don't have to keep it alive. Just those simple sorts of things like from everyday living. Once you bring in life and vitality, you bring in greater complications, and there's that much more to remember. So there was another reason yet for a longer rest. But there's still yet another reason. I got to keep on spinning out all of these ideas. Another reason yet for the longer rest between this grand period of time that is characterized by the nature of the sun and that which is characterized by the nature of the moon is because the more deeply you get into matter, the more things get slowed down. Again, let's go back to the analogy that we were looking at last time. If we took an electric drill and tried to bore through this floor, first we'd go through the plywood. And then we'd have to pull out and pull back the shavings, and then we'd go through the insulation, and then we'd have to pull out again, and then we'd start going into the concrete. And when we go into the concrete, because it's so much more dense, everything gets slowed down. And if you've ever drilled like with a really big, strong drill, the pulling out is as tricky as the going in. You get it a little bit at an angle, it gets snagged, you can just about snap your wrists with it because the drill is strong enough. And so when you come out, even, the drill really gets slowed down. If you're strong enough and stupid enough, you can drive the drill in with so much force that you can burn the motor out, the electric motor. And so when you start coming out, you pick up speed slowly. And it is because of the density of matter or the depth of the unconsciousness that is being digested in the creative evolutionary process or evolutionary creative process, because the density or the deepness of the unconsciousness that is being crystallized and how far it's being crystallized, it takes longer to pull out. All right. So we again started moving forward. And we again began recapitulating. We began revolving through these different states of dimensionality. And in this case, the deepest that we got was into the etheric realms. That is to say, in the old moon period. Now remember, when we're using these names, we're not talking about Saturn that's up in the heavens and Sun that's up in the heavens and Moon that's in the heavens. We're talking more about the character of those planets and how that character is shown astrologically in the astrological effects of those planets right now.
And so there's a character to each of these periods of time, and there's a character to each of these globes. Maybe we'll get really down to some much deeper nitty-gritty and go into more and more focusing on the globes as time goes on. I've decided I'm going to remake the notes for this course because I'm going to have to anyway, and I want to bring in more and more material and let it be as rich as possible, as is possible. So in this period, it's called the moon period. And where we began as a mineral being that was made of thought, and then we became plant-like, where we had a vitality, but that our physical body was no more dense than a desire, and the interpenetrating vitality was like thought. So the same relationship that thought has in instigating desire in our consciousness now is analogous to the life and vitality that the effect that has on our physical nature. That by changing our vitality, by getting a big burst of solar energy, or through a laying on of hands, or drinking 5 gallons of fresh pressed vegetable juice or something like that, you get a big charge of vitality, and that changes your physical. And you can see it happen. Like normally you notice that you're getting ill a day or so before you actually get ill. And the same thing happens the other way, coming back. You feel in the vital body that you're getting well, but it takes another few days before the symptoms completely manifest in the physical body. So that inwardly you have the feeling of well-being again, but you're still weak. The changes in the cleansing that have taken place in the physical aren't there. Okay, so we began recapitulating. Now what happened in all of this is when we see things, when you watch your children grow up, that's one thing. But when you're an older person and your children start having children, you become a grandperson, then you're not only watching your children, but you're watching your children watch their children. And that gives a much greater wisdom and insight into the nature of human development when you watch somebody else do what you have done in an analogous position. And that gives a depth of understanding that is what makes old people wise, because they see those things. Now something similar took place between the cosmic night, between the sun period and the moon period. When we saw between the Saturn and sun period, we saw a number of forms in reverse order, and we saw how this form was metamorphized out of this and out of this. We didn't really see it. We experienced it. We were worked on. There were words, and those words interpenetrated us, and they gave us forms, and the forms that we took changed. And in the changing of them, and in actually the changing of our stuff, I don't think we were quite like going through a periodic table the way the minerals of our time are doing. But as we changed in stuff and in the forms we changed in, when we saw that in a reverse action extended over time, we weren't experiencing each individual form. We were experiencing the metamorphosis. And when we saw that, that gave us the idea of life. But now when we're looking back between the moon period and the sun period, when we're looking back at how something is extended and how that leads to growth and how that leads to an inner vitality. And then one gets the idea that behind something that can cause a static growth, there is the potential of motion. And so we came to an understanding that in the same way that life causes things to grow, but it must remain rooted, we came to an understanding that it's possible for a growing form to move.
and we understood that it was possible for there to be something behind mere growth that instigated growth to become independent and to become something energetic and something active. That change of consciousness from the experiences that we had, seeing the change from form to vitality, and then seeing that relationship led to the understanding of the relationship of emotion or motivation to move. So in short, we passed from a plant-like stage in the sun period to where we became animal-like in the moon period. And we were very primitive animals in that we had motivation, we had feeling, and we had independent motion. And all of this was, I don't know how to say it, this was emanated into us. It was like the effulgence of light, but it was also like the immediate understanding of reading somebody else's mind. You feel and think exactly what they're feeling, only this was actually brought into us. So see, like we're coming out of a deeper, our consciousness in the Saturn period was like a deep, deep trance. And then it came to be like a dreamless sleep of plants. And then in the animal state, it was a pictorial consciousness, like when we dream now. It was live and with colors and pictures. And so this, by interacting first with form and then with vitality and then with desire, our consciousness is being waked up. This is a process that's still going on. We're still being waked up, sometimes more rudely than others. I happen to be a person who still wants to sometimes recap back into the animal stage, and I'm a little bit dreamy. And I've had several instances in life where I've been dreamy and haven't been awake to what was going on right now, and I've walked into things like light poles and things like that. I had big lumps on my forehead, and I actually made a light pole go gong. It's waking up, like in those in those interactions. You actually do come to life. You come to wake up. Okay. Now, the way this recapitulatory process works, let's go back to this whole idea of unity. We've talked about unity of consciousness being maintained through analogy, so that an atom is like a solar system, or so that our threefold spiritual consciousness is almost identical with the threefold spiritual consciousness of God. There is, as above, so below. There is the principle of analogy. But there's another way that unity is maintained in every place but the world that we're living in now. We have a grand isolation and quarantine in materialism in this world, and this materialism causes illusions. And one of those illusions is separation such that things aren't integral. A principle that works with the divine, and everything that's divine is everything that is born of the Spirit is born whole. An infant, when it's born, it is complete, or it's everything is there. It's going to metamorphose through all the stages till old age, but everything that is needed is there, and it's just a matter of development. But it's whole. Everything that comes from a spiritual center, that comes from a spiritual source, is born whole. So, when we came out into our animal-like state of existence, we didn't just add on motivation. You can't add on motivation. You have to be born whole with it. So we went through these recapitulations. And in the first revolution, in the different dimensions of experience, we recapitulated everything we did before, all of the form experience. And in the second revolution, we recapitulated all of the vitality, all of the life experience. And then it took all the way until the third revolution that something new could be done, because first we had to redo everything that we did before. Because the new couldn't be added on, it had to come from within. And we had to have the form first, and then the other things proceeded out of the form. Golly, that's only one page of notes. Oh no, that's 2 pages. I just don't know what the other one is. Is it really there, or have I lost it? Yes, it is. I don't know. See, I'm not wide awake. So, if we look at things, let's look at the cosmos. This is a formula now, and the formula becomes more elaborate. The first thing that we got was the rough material experience. Everything was dark. There was a definite outline between the manifest creation and the unmanifest. And that outline was the warmth of our sacrifice by being immersed into matter. So in the Saturn period, it was dark and warm, and it was like reading thoughts rather than seeing things with our eyes. Then, in the Sun period, we came to light. And we became plant-like, extending ourselves toward light, which was in every direction, because we were within the whole solar system. The whole solar system was just one gigantic astral light, because it was no deeper than the astral matter of the desire world. Now, things come to where we can actually experience emotion and desire. We get the feeling of it. So it's saying that in any fundamental creative process, first we warm up to the experience of it. We can't just do a masterpiece first. We warm up to the experience of it. Then we get light. We become enlightened about it, and we can approach it with vigor. And after that, we get the feel of it. Only when we've looked at it and had something of... So it's like saying the rudimentary sense organs, and we still didn't have sense organs yet. First we had the hearing of sound, then we had sight, and then we had the sense of feel. All right? First things in the Saturn period were no denser than thought. And then in the Sun period, they were no more dense than emotion. And finally, they're no more dense than ether, than vitality. First, we could only experience form, then we could grow, and then we could actually move around. Now, if we look at all of this, there are some things. Now, words are going to take on really strange meanings now. Even though we're going into more and more dense matter as we're progressing, and we're spiraling within a spiral to greater and greater solidity, our conceptions were becoming softer. Because as our consciousness awakened, we were able to penetrate more with our demi-waking consciousness the things, the forms that we existed in. And it's very much just like we see in the world now. If we look at the minerals, they're hard. We look at a plant, the part of the plant that's alive anyway, the leaves are a little bit softer. But they still get to be woody and they get to be dry. But if we look at our current animals, the current animals are softer. And so, the more there is interpenetrating, the more consciousness, the more the states of matter become more thoroughly imbued with the spirit as the consciousness waking, the more approaching waking consciousness is associated with the spirit, the more it comes into the body, the softer the body becomes. So what we're saying is that in a very highly spiritual person, it doesn't mean that the bones are going to be soft or that you're going to be soft-headed or something like that. It does mean that there's something more pliable, that the experience of the world is much more penetrated by the waking spiritual consciousness. And so that's what happened. So first we just had commands emanated into us. And then we, in our dreamless sleep, like a plant, we reached for the sun or toward the light as it was emanated to us from various different spiritual hierarchs. And then finally, when we got to the point of the moon period, the moon represents a pictorial consciousness. And it means that our consciousness was awake enough so that if you watch, for example, if you watch a dog that's sleeping, and watch the neural impulses of a dog that's sleeping, and you'll see that it's running in its sleep, and it's chasing animals in its sleep. And it is like, very, very similar, it's like going to the movies. Only the pictures that are seen inside of a dog aren't quite like Mickey Mouse or the Animation Festival or anything like that. They're more indistinct, and they have a soul quality, such that a dog can very often tell if you meet somebody new and your dog doesn't like that person. The dog can see an antipathy between the desire body's hatred between the two people years before it dawns on you. Also, an animal, like even there was this man up here in Eagle River, Wisconsin. What was his name? Marty. I forget his first name. But they called him the St. Francis of the North. And deer would come out of the woods, and beaver would come out of the woods, and things like that. And he could pet them, because they recognized in him someone who was harmless, and someone where that there was a loving sympathy. And so we began to see and to be guided and motivated by these movies. Obviously, that's the way most of the animals are motivated now, even though they have vision. But can you imagine, like, you think about an eagle flying way up over the water, and if you look down and the sun is behind you, the sun is just a glare. But yet that eagle knows how to go down, dive beneath the surface of the water, get a little fish and come out of the water, where you can't do that with the eye. You're seeing that with an inner vision. And there's, and it isn't all, I want to take a little aside. It isn't all violent. Even the Darwinian conception of survival of the fittest is only partially true. It's true that it is a life and death matter in some cases, but that isn't what's important. What's important is that the lessons are learned, and not necessarily that something lives or something dies. And I don't say this to justify the slaughter of animals or anything like that, or to bring unnecessary punishment, but the lessons that animals get in playing a very, very full hide-and-seek game with each other are real lessons. And in those experiences, they're equally matched. The fastest predator and the fastest prey, they're pretty close with each other. And the group spirits are learning in competition with this. In fact, there are some things that in the early stages, when the plant-like harmlessness is still there, all of them sense, it happens to this day yet, a cat will let a little
baby do things to it that an adult could never do, because the cat senses the innocence and it senses the harmlessness. And if you watch little kittens fight or little bear cubs fight or something like that, they know when it's play and they know when it's real. And even when it's real, in a way, it is play. But that gets on a very, very deep subject that I don't wish to go into, because this is getting a little bit too far afield. All right, let's add something new. In the past, we've added conceptions of density of matter and of different kinds of vehicles and different hierarchies, and we've looked at different stages, and we've looked at different phases, all of which we're going to come back and look at much more thoroughly as we go on. But let's look at an element. Because in looking at an element, we get a little bit closer to the experience of what's. Globes are found in different realms or in different worlds or different spiritual states, you might say. And when each of these worlds is a macrocosm, you might say it's the body of God. Like God's physical body is everywhere where there is a physical planet. Instead of being all tied together with a skeletal system and locked inside a bag of skin, God's physical liver is in one part, and many million miles away the kidneys are, and such like that. The organs of the physical body of God are like the planets, but they're macrocosmic. They take basically a globular form, and that globular form is a macrocosm within which or upon which all sorts of different creatures evolve, like ourselves. Now, in understanding a globe or understanding a world or realm of consciousness, it's helpful to understand a quality of the macrocosm that comes through in a stage of development that brings the consciousness of a given state or a given world, it brings it through clearly to the understanding, much more clearly than that definition or that non-definition. And that intermediary state between a world and a world being manifested in some particular body, that vehicle of consciousness is called alchemically, and in spiritual parlance, that's called an element. Not to be confused with the modern chemical use of the word element, which is one state of matter, one particular lesson that is being learned by like an oxygen or a sulfur. We're not talking about the periodic table now. We're talking about when we say someone is exposed to the elements. In the Saturn period, the first element we had was fire. That is, what we experienced was the fire of thought. And almost all of our experience in the Saturn period was within the transcendental realms. Only in concrete thought did we have any experience at all of something that was manifest. So we had all the qualities of spirit and the spiritual realms, and spirit is the driving force, the creative push. So our experience that we got in the Saturn period, when we sacrificed and felt warmth, was something of pure spirit, and that pure spirit was like fire. And relative, now this is analogous.
element consciousness is recapitulated in every world that we're in. Right now, we have an experience of fire even in the physical world, and that is energy. But the quality of it is spiritedness. Then, when we became vegetable-like, something that's recapitulated even among our current vegetables, we went through an air-like state. That is to say that fire draws its own experience to itself. Now I'm going to talk about fire as we see if I were to light a match right now. Fire has all of the elemental stages currently available to us. First, there is heat, and then there is oxygen. Oxygen converted into CO2. And that is to say, air is associated with light. Just like in astrology. Astrology has all of the cosmos built into it, that by drawing new material to ourselves and starting a motion, like when a fire starts, it sucks air to itself. It means that some form of intelligence, and in our case, the intelligence of vitality, was brought to us. All right. Now, in the moon period, things get denser, and we get water. Now, when we've talked about all of these globes that we revolve through, we've talked about them. We've talked about them as A, B, C, D, or Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan. And we talked about them in relation to different periods, Saturn, Sun, Moon, such like that, in the revolution of consciousness. We've said that there is a superimposition, that at any given time we're always building on 4 different realms. We've talked about it, I don't want to go into too many far out details. We've always said that there are 4 different realms that we're working through. Like right now, in our current experience, we're right now in the physical world. And then when we die, we pass through the etheric, the desire, and the world of concrete thought. And then we get a rest in transcendence. And then we're evolving within these 4 so that the globes are superimposed upon each other within the same realm. Saturn and Vulcan, Sun and Venus, Moon and Jupiter, and the Earth period in the 2 halves. What I'm trying to get to is that within this schema of revolving through 4 levels of consciousness when we're evolving, that there is a polarization. The same polarization that we talked about from the very beginning, the polarization of spirit being the positive, awake, creative manifestation of being, and matter being the inert reflection of creativity projected into ignorance to bring out new wisdom and experience. There is a pole between spirit and matter. The same is true in our elements of experience. Fire and air, as they're seen in astrology, are considered positive elements because their main activity is like being spiritually driving. Water and earth, this is, every fire gives off H2O, gives off water, and finally from burning and reburning, the last product of fire is ash. So anytime you light a match, you really are reproducing the state of the whole cosmos that we see around us, that we're looking at in a very elaborate, hopefully deep way. So that water and earth are more inert, and they deal more with the form side of things rather than the spirit and intelligence side of things. So when it comes now to the moon period, all of this is just to get to this principle. When it comes to the moon period, we are in the third revolution, and we are penetrating into the realms of matter so deeply that the elemental consciousness now is much more oriented toward the form, and it's much more oriented toward the passive, inert, receptive qualities of matter rather than those of spirit. Now, this does something, this goes along with something in our consciousness and in our development of our bodies. If we're mineral-like, it's like making snowballs. You can make a snowball and pick up any snow anywhere and put it together, and you've made a form. That's out of matter. If you're a plant, you can take that plant and you can grow it just about anywhere, and you can even take it and you can clone it. It's fixed. But when we get to the animal-like state of consciousness, one experiences the quality associated with the inert elements, water and earth, in such a way that there is a quality of separation. It's beginning to come in. Like we all think when we're in this room, we all think we're separate beings. And we all think that we could do everything better than everyone else. When in reality, if we were in the more spiritual realms, all fire is the same fire. If we were in the more spiritual realms, we would recognize the greater unity. And so we're in realms that have greater ignorance, even though we're becoming more wakingly self-consciousness. This is what's there's so many different ramifications. It's beautiful to see it as it all comes out. Our association is more with complete separation. So that's what differentiates an animal from a plant, is the ability to experience the watery, the first of the inert states. If you look at a bird in a tree, you see that there's a distinct difference between the bird and the tree, just beside the fact that the bird's body is more complicated, it's more soft and things like that. The bird can fly away. And so what happens is that the deeper we go in elemental consciousness, when we get to the state of water, as we know from the moon, and from just, if we take water, we pour it in a pan, it takes the shape of the pan, whatever we put there, this is energy, this is gaseous, this is liquid. Gases and liquids are both considered fluids, but you try to pour a gas, it's like the airy signs. They're aloof, they're far away and distant from each other. Like our airy sign right now is going to be far away and distant from us. But when you have water sticks together. All water runs downhill and it goes into the ocean or into the lake or whatever. And that is a quality that is associated with water, is subjectivity. When we ignore the universality, the objectivity that comes from the Spirit. In the Spirit, we can be very objective. We can see the unity between all things. And we can say, oh, this is true of all of this. But when we start getting to experience the watery states, this is going into water, you recognize a subjectivity. And that subjectivity is associated with an independent body that can be separated within the macrocosmic realm, and that is what allows movement. And that is what makes possible the development of separate selfhood. We're not going to go into that aspect of the moon period tonight. We're going to play around and look at all sorts of other things either tonight or in successive weeks. So, we became lively animals, subjective and separate. We weren't like just plants twining together in some swamp or jungle. We were actually floating around. And we were floating around, moving around our motility, because obviously if everything is no more dense than the ethers, you can fly through the ethers just by an act of will. But of course we didn't have much will then. We were more or less instigated, motivated by pictures drawing us. We hadn't even awakened the quality of selfhood yet. Now, things were different then. These animals, moon period animals, when we were moon period animals, we still had a little bit of the plant-likeness with us. We weren't quite as independent as the modern animals. Modern animals are still directed. All of our activities, the gods interpenetrate us. It's almost like mesmeric passes. If you know how to control the energies in your body, you can hypnotize a person just with the motions of your hand. You don't even have to touch them at all. And you can make an animal move right along. You make every hair on its back stand up if you want. You can move them right along if you have that control of energy. And this is something we were moved about by group intelligences, group spirits. Sort of like if you look there, if you watch birds, if you startle a group of birds, no matter how many there are, or if you see there's a group of fish in the water, in crystal clear water, and you drop a little stone in there and they all take off, I have never yet seen one bird bump into another bird. I've never yet seen one fish bump into another fish. And for years I've been trying it. I go around, as one of my hobbies, I go around frightening groups of birds, just trying to cause mid-air collisions. And if you watch, you can see them in a school of fish or in a school of birds. They have a formation. And that formation is like the lines of force or the lines of energy of the group intelligence that is guiding them. Also, the group intelligence gives them something like a separate self. And so we have the guidance of the animals of the moon period still had a stem. We all had like a giant umbilical cord. It's so lunar it follows that way. We had a giant umbilical cord that was made something like the silver cord is in a human being. It was made up of, oh boy, it brings to mind all sorts of mythological things, but I'm going to have to pass them up because it's fun as it would be. It would just be too much of it. It was made up of thought stuff and ether and desire material, and we were motivated. And so we were just sort of floating around in this very stretchable, elastic stuff of life and energy throughout the cosmos. Now, mind you, the solar system itself now was like it had fire, it had a central ball of fire, and it had rushes of air, and when there was water, it was more or less like a steam. And this is described, we're going to go into the biblical things of this eventually. It's described as the third day of creation when the waters were separated from the waters. This is in the Bible, but you have to really be able to read. It's not days like these kind of days at all. And so there was a convection of water being drawn into the central mass and then being thrown out and cooled and then being drawn in. And in that experience of water, we became subjective creatures, and something else takes place. Whatever happens in the microcosm happens in the macrocosm. Subjectivity occurred in the macrocosm in such a way that previously, in the Saturn period, in the Sun period, the whole solar cosmos was one. But in the Moon period, the same thing that gave us as animal-like beings, not animals, but animal-like beings, that separate, the ability to have separate bodies, it produced within the solar system a giant separate body which rotated or revolved through inner space, so that there became a greater differentiation within the whole cosmos. It was sometimes, it's by some people called an old moon, but really what it was an internal satellite that didn't have an external body that it went around. It just rotated around within the mass, which was warmer in the center and colder on the outsides, but it wasn't differentiated like the sun like we have now. And this was all in a state of energy. So then the whole cosmos was differentiated into a macrocosmic body within the whole, and then within that macrocosmic body were these animals. And of course, there were plants and minerals and such like that. And what we gave to the cosmos, remember last time we talked about the principle of sacrifice. This has got so much information that I'm running by that you have to have had all the past recapitulations. First, we gave form. Just as we couldn't exist, we'd puddle into nothing, our bodies would, if there were no minerals here. We'd, just like the real magician idea, something disappears into an energy state. For everything that exists in our world, the minerals provide the form. And we just said a few minutes ago, the plants provide the life. Everything is useful at every step of the way. Then, in the Moon period, when we became animal-like, we sacrificed the ability to make vital life for the cosmos. But instead, we became moody like the water. It was like mist, and a mist in the evening is different than a mist in the morning. I don't know how you say it, but if you look at a mist that forms over a swamp, over a body of water in the morning, it's a different kind than if there's one like a will-o'-the-wisp that forms in the evening when the dew is forming. It's mood, it's feeling. And so what we evolved as human beings, as animals, in the Moon period was feeling. But mind you now, in the complexity of all of this, everything begins with the mind. When we first started our physical bodies, it was in the realm of thought. When we first started our vital bodies, our etheric bodies, our physical bodies were in the desire world, but the new desire body was in thought. Now the same kind of thing happens. Our physical bodies become etheric. Our vital bodies become out of desire stuff. And the new bodies, the bodies of feeling, were born out of thought. Everything in the cosmos is born out of thought, and we're going to have a special lecture about all of that, because eventually, way down the line, because there is all the ability to become a creative power, to have godlike participation in the creation, all goes right back to the focus of the mind. all of these recapitulations that we go to, or the rests where we see things backwards going into cosmic mind, all of that goes through a focus of thought. So we had this thought emotional body. Now the subjectivity, this is so beautiful the way this happened. The subjectivity that allows us to have an individual body to separate, eventually, in the fifth revolution, gave us the propensity to have an individuated self, the third of the threefold spirit. We're not going to talk about that tonight. But what we're talking about in the development of the emotional desire body, what it did is it produced a species-like consciousness. I don't know if you've ever read that wonderful little book called The Once and Future King. The story of Epimetheus and Prometheus is retold by the badger. You know, young Arthur is transformed by Merlin into all of these different animal states, and as he goes through each animal state, he learns a specific lesson, and then finally he meets the badger, and the badger tells the story of Prometheus and Epimetheus. Prometheus and Epimetheus gave to the creatures each something special, and Epimetheus gave courage to one animal and speed to another animal and cunning to another animal. And when it came to the humans, nothing was left. And so Prometheus gave fire, that is, creative fire, the fire of the spirit to be indwelling. And the badger tells the same story. The badger's reality is in the jaw, because the badger can do everything. It can dig its hole, it can fight, it does everything with the jaw. Obviously, a Taurus animal. It's got that very hard, set kind of way about it. And that's what our experience was. Instead of evolving forms or taking forms and giving them life and extending them, we became different moods, different feelings. Each species of animal in the world now represents a microcosm. It's a complete whole, but it represents a microcosm of a specific type of feeling. It's interesting in all of this, even if you take this in its symbolic way, all of the really fiercest animals, the cold-blooded animals, the dinosaurs and all of those creatures that they keep finding more and more of, were huge, big things, and the world was populated with those very, very, violent sorts of things, cold-blooded. And the horses back then were little tiny things that would fit no more than in the palm of the hand. Even whales began as little shrews back in those times, little teeny tiny things. And now, if we look at it, all of the mammals, the warm-blooded animals have gotten big and plenteous, and all the little lizards have gotten smaller and smaller. There are a few crocodiles and alligators around, but the lizards have gotten smaller and smaller and less of them, indicating in a symbolic way what's happening in terms of evolution. So, okay, that's what we were. So, to recapitulate it all, we first warm up, and then we come to light. And out of light become individual things. And these individual things have feelings. And so when we get the feel of things, we live in a state of mood. We have independent motion, we have motility, we have motivation. We now have an internal picture consciousness, because with that, internal picture consciousness, we can understand different, separate lessons. And it isn't all one life. The vitality that is within all plants is the same vitality. It's exactly the way the Bible says that there is one life. That's true. But when it comes to emotion and desire, there are all of these different subjective moods. All right. This is getting way too long. I guess I got too excited about things. And by golly, I've said more of the notes without the notes. We're going along here really well. Oh, yes. Something new took place. When we came to the state of individuation, we began our first real externalization. One of the big differences, it's still true to this day, one of the big differences between plants and animals is communication. Sound, you can get sound from a plant by trees creaking or wind blowing through leaves, but it's external. And with the ability to have a subjective beginning in individuation comes the ability to begin to externalize. So far, we've only been talking about internalization, not externalization. Now, with the animal-like state begins the first externalization, and that is sounds. We were able to take our feelings and give them out into the world, sort of like the way birds sing or squirrels call or whatever like that. And we began to bring to the cosmos, that's the way that we started giving, instead of being passive like minerals and plants, we began to be active in our giving, and we began to pour out these emanations, the sounds, which were sort of strange cries and such like that. Oh boy, we're way ahead here. All right. We're almost done. I want to talk a little bit about the recapitulations. And then we'll just about be finished, and I have to decide when I want to bring in more other things. Because the denouement of all of these talks, when we get to the last of the last, should weave together hundreds and thousands. It'll probably be a 16-hour lecture, and we'll weave together all of these different things. Actually, as we start unwinding in the whole second half, the exvolutionary half, we'll start weaving together, and we'll see how these different principles come to fruit in different ways. We're going to bring in, fairly soon, we're going to bring in the gods, and then we're going to bring in how it all ties in together with astrological ideals and how those astrological ideals are present even in our everyday life. And then we'll start dealing with the powers. I'm not saying, not actually teaching astrology, but just well, we'll get to it then. Okay, let's look. In the first three revolutions, we recapitulated. Now, the physical form had to anticipate. It had to anticipate when we came out with a new physical form. It had to anticipate desire. So, in this, we've talked about there are two streams of consciousness, one incoming, one outgoing. So the physical body was just a form as we were mineral-like. So when we recapitulated the first revolution of the moon period, and we're passing through the globes, we come out with a physical body now that can have vital life within it, and so that it can grow. And the next stage in the form is motility. So something like the form in the Saturn revolution is something like a skeleton. and it isn't either an exoskeleton or an endoskeleton, but something that the basic form can be maintained. Then, when we come to the sun revolution, the vital body must, the physical body must now be able to support a vital body from the sun, and so it must have life. And so it must have some sort of a circulatory system. I'm not saying that it's like our blood vessels and our skeletons of now, but it must have some sort of a circulation of life so that vitality can be brought to every part. And so in the Saturn revolution of the moon period, it's still the Saturn revolution, something like muscles had to be developed for desire, for motility, something for propelling. And what we're saying here is if you're building a form, first you have to have a skeletal idea, something that gives you structure. And then you have to have something that gives you life, and that life can move and grow and bring plasticity. And then if you're creating, this is if you're creating a poem, or even if you're creating a building. Obviously, if you're creating a building, the Saturn part is much more important than all the others, but you still have air conditioning and things like that. You then have to have something for propelling, something for energy. And those are what took place in the Saturn revolution. There was an anticipation, an internal anticipation of the new thing, so that when the physical body was rebuilt, it was rebuilt for these ends. In the sun revolution, there had to be something for receiving vitality all along, some kind of receptor of vitality, like what the photosynthesis was, but it also had to be able to specialize that vitality so that life could be brought to energize desire. So you have both the sun and moon qualities within a vital nature now. So we're going to come to, when we get later on, this is going to be very, very detailed, and it's going to be very beautiful. And we're going to, hopefully, if I can bring on all the examples, some of these lectures are going to have to be many, 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 many minuscule ones. And finally, in the moon period, then, we have the desire body itself, which begins in its mineral-like state. So the form takes on a new quality, and it now has three stages of form. The vital body now has two states of vitality, and there is a desire body. Now, in the incoming, first there was the sense of sound. Then there is the sense of sight. And then, finally, there is the sense of feeling. All right. And then there's rest from all of this. When you have something that is this complicated, and when the spirit withdraws, because the spirit has made this all softer now, what do we know about things that are softer, that are more complicated? They rot quicker. And when they rot, when there's been desire in there, that independent quality, it's got a real, you smell rotten plants, they're bad, but they're not like smelling rotten animals. And so like all of this stuff rots more quickly, but there's much more to rot, there's much more to absorbing and digesting all the qualities of rot. All right. I think that's about all I want to talk about. The vital body is now capable of perception, and it's capable of motion, going both ways for vitalization. It's also capable of memory as well as perception, and it has new organs so that it can carry energy with it. I think that's as far as I want to go right now, because I couldn't go any further without getting into something complicated. And next time we'll have a little bit different type of a get-together, I think. I'm trying to rethink this all. It's hard to hold the whole big thing in mind all at once. All right. Thank you very much. Oh, are there any questions? I tired everybody out enough so that there are no questions. Good.